Say it louder, the billionaire said in flawless Arabic, his smile sharp enough to silence the entire table. She's only here to refill glasses. She'll never understand a word. A few quiet laughs circled the polished mahogany table like invisible smoke, disappearing beneath the soft jazz drifting through the ballroom of the Grand Crescent Hotel in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across tailored suits, designer gowns, and polished marble floors that reflected every confident stride. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline shimmered against the spring night, while inside, a dinner worth nearly $2 billion had become the center of the international business world. Investors from New York, Dubai, London, and Riyadh had gathered for one purpose alone: to witness Ethan Caldwell, the 40-year-old Arab-American billionaire behind Caldwell Dynamics, finalize the largest artificial intelligence infrastructure partnership of his career. Ethan looked exactly like the magazines described him. Impeccably dressed, calm under pressure, brilliant in negotiations. A man who believed every room naturally belonged to him the moment he entered it. His confidence had built an empire, but somewhere along the journey it had quietly transformed into something heavier. Something that made him believe status measured intelligence, and uniforms defined human worth. Across the room, servers moved with practiced precision, blending into the elegant choreography of fine dining. They anticipated every gesture before it happened, replaced silverware without interrupting conversations, and poured sparkling water with hands steady enough to disappear into the background. Among them was Naomi Brooks, a 26-year-old black waitress whose crisp black uniform carried no hint of the remarkable life hidden behind her calm expression. Her posture was straight, her pace unhurried. She greeted every guest with the same quiet professionalism, never asking for attention and never expecting recognition. Most people noticed only the tray balanced effortlessly in her hands. Few noticed the careful way she listened, the thoughtful stillness behind her warm brown eyes, or the confidence that never demanded applause. Tonight had already been unusually long. She had started her shift before noon, helping prepare one of the hotel's largest private events of the year. Every place setting had been measured twice. Every wine glass aligned perfectly. Every detail mattered because wealthy clients often remembered tiny imperfections more vividly than extraordinary service. Naomi understood that better than anyone. She had learned years ago that dignity was something you carried within yourself because the world did not always hand it to you. As she approached Ethan's table with a fresh bottle of sparkling mineral water, another sentence floated through the air in Arabic, followed by another ripple of restrained laughter. Ethan never lowered his voice. Why would he? In his mind, the language itself was a wall no one around him could cross. One executive leaned closer and whispered something that made several guests hide amused smiles behind expensive crystal glasses. Ethan answered with another remark, even bolder this time, his confidence growing with every word. Naomi reached the table, gently refilled each glass, and offered the same polite smile she had given every guest that evening. Not once did she interrupt. Not once did her expression change. She simply thanked them softly, collected an empty bottle, and turned to leave. Behind her, Ethan chuckled again, convinced his private joke remained safely hidden inside a language he believed belonged only to those seated around him. None of them noticed the almost invisible pause in Naomi's footsteps. None of them realized her fingers tightened ever so slightly around the empty bottle. And none of them could possibly imagine that before this extraordinary night reached its end, the quiet woman they had dismissed without a second thought would become the only voice everyone in that glittering ballroom could hear. Naomi disappeared through the polished service doors without looking back, leaving behind a table that still echoed with quiet amusement. The laughter faded almost as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by discussions of acquisition strategies, international regulations, and projected revenue that stretched well beyond $1 billion. Ethan Caldwell leaned comfortably into his chair, completely unaware that the evening had already begun shifting beneath his feet. His attention returned to the delegation from Riyadh, whose senior representatives spoke in measured Arabic while reviewing confidential figures displayed on a secured tablet. Every sentence carried enormous weight because tomorrow morning the signatures on those documents could reshape entire technology markets across North America and the Middle East. Around them, Servers glided silently between tables while a string quartet performed near the ballroom entrance, their music floating softly beneath the conversations without ever demanding attention. Naomi continued her work exactly as she had during every previous shift. She refreshed water glasses, cleared finished plates, and thanked each guest with the same steady voice. No frustration appeared on her face. No resentment escaped through her expression. Anyone watching her would have believed the comments at Ethan's table had never reached her ears. Yet inside her mind, every Arabic sentence remained perfectly clear, each word remembered with remarkable precision. She had learned long ago that the strongest response was rarely the fastest one. Years before she ever carried a serving tray through luxury hotels, language had become part of her everyday life. Her grandmother, Miriam Brooks, had spent nearly 3 decades teaching international students at a community language center on Chicago's North Side. Their modest apartment had always welcomed visitors from around the world. Arabic, French, Spanish, and English often blended together around the small dinner table, where conversations were treated as bridges instead of barriers. Naomi had grown up listening before speaking, observing before answering. Her grandmother often smiled and reminded her that every language carried 2 dictionaries. One translated words, the other translated character. You could always tell who someone truly was when they believed nobody else understood them. Those lessons stayed with Naomi long after her grandmother retired. While working full-time and helping support her family, Naomi continued studying languages through evening courses, online lectures, and countless conversations with immigrants who became lifelong friends. She never imagined those quiet years of discipline would matter inside an elegant ballroom filled with billionaires. To her, learning another language had never been about impressing strangers. It had always been about respecting people enough to understand their stories. Back inside the ballroom, Ethan accepted another glass of sparkling water without bothering to look at the person serving him. His confidence remained untouched as he casually joked with the executives beside him, convinced every private remark remained safely protected behind Arabic. Across the room, several investors watched the discussions with growing anticipation because the evening was entering its most delicate stage. Every sentence now influenced trust. Every detail mattered. Every translation had the power to strengthen a partnership or quietly unravel it. Naomi paused beside the service station for only a heartbeat before lifting another silver tray. Her breathing stayed calm. Her hands remained perfectly steady. The room still saw an invisible waitress. But somewhere between the polished marble floors, the quiet music, and the expensive promises filling the air, an unseen truth waited patiently for the exact moment when silence would become impossible to ignore. The first course disappeared beneath polished silver lids, and the ballroom settled into the comfortable rhythm that only extraordinary wealth seemed to create. Conversations overlapped without becoming noisy. Waiters exchanged silent glances instead of words. Every movement appeared rehearsed, almost effortless. Yet beneath that polished surface, something far less elegant had begun to grow. Ethan Caldwell accepted another briefing from his legal advisor while the delegation from Riyadh quietly reviewed the final clauses of the proposed agreement. One sentence after another flowed through Arabic, precise and confident, occasionally interrupted by restrained laughter that never seemed accidental. The executives believed they occupied a private world hidden behind their shared language. To them, everyone else in the room was simply background. Naomi crossed the ballroom carrying a polished silver tray filled with fresh espresso cups, her pace steady despite nearly 10 hours on her feet. She stopped briefly beside another server, exchanged a courteous smile, then continued toward the executive table exactly on schedule. Nothing about her suggested irritation. She neither hurried nor hesitated. Years in hospitality had taught her that true professionalism was measured most clearly when nobody noticed it. As she approached, another Arabic conversation unfolded between Ethan and one of the visiting executives. This time the discussion drifted away from harmless jokes and toward assumptions. One guest quietly remarked that luxury hotels always hired attractive staff because appearances impressed investors more than qualifications. Another answered that some people were fortunate enough to earn generous tips without ever needing higher education. Ethan responded with an amused smile, and added that confidence often disappeared the moment reality required intelligence. Several men nodded. One chuckled softly before lifting his coffee cup. Naomi heard every word without slowing her steps. She carefully placed each porcelain cup onto its matching saucer, ensuring every handle faced exactly the same direction. Her attention to detail remained flawless. When she reached Ethan, he barely glanced at her before returning to the discussion, convinced she remained comfortably outside the conversation. Naomi simply wished everyone an enjoyable evening in calm English and stepped away. Behind her, another executive quietly praised Ethan's observation, adding that language itself was sometimes the simplest way to separate people who belonged from people who merely served. The remark lingered in the air longer than anyone realized. Across the ballroom, several investors continued speaking with hotel representatives, while financial analysts exchanged updated projections. Large digital displays near the stage rotated through presentation graphics highlighting projected growth, international expansion, and expected shareholder returns. Every person inside the room focused on numbers, market influence, and future success. Almost nobody paid attention to the woman quietly replacing coffee cups. They saw a uniform. They saw a name tag. They saw someone whose purpose ended the moment the table was clean. What they did not see was years of patient discipline, countless evenings spent mastering difficult grammar, conversations held with immigrant families from across the world, and a grandmother whose greatest lesson had never been about vocabulary at all. She had taught Naomi that arrogance always became louder when it believed it could not be understood. As Naomi reached the service station once again, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the evening's formal negotiation session was about to begin. Hotel staff received final instructions through discreet earpieces. Guests returned to their assigned seats. The atmosphere grew noticeably quieter. Somewhere inside that silence, Ethan believed he was preparing to secure the biggest agreement of his career. Naomi understood something entirely different. Every careless sentence spoken that evening had quietly built toward a single moment, and that moment was now drawing closer with every passing second. The ballroom settled into complete attention as the hotel's event director welcomed everyone to the formal negotiation session. Conversations dissolved into respectful silence. Crystal glasses reflected the warm chandelier light, while digital presentation screens slowly illuminated behind the stage. The agreement before the room represented years of planning, countless international meetings, and enough projected revenue to influence technology markets for the next decade. Every executive straightened their posture. Every advisor opened a leather portfolio. Every translator prepared detailed notes. Ethan Caldwell rose with effortless confidence, adjusting the sleeve of his tailored navy suit before thanking the guests for traveling from across the world. His voice carried naturally through the ballroom without needing the microphone. He spoke first in English, then shifted comfortably into Arabic while acknowledging the delegation from Riyadh. Several attendees smiled with admiration. Ethan had earned a reputation for commanding any room he entered. His intelligence was undeniable, his preparation meticulous, and his ability to negotiate had transformed Caldwell Dynamics into one of the fastest-growing artificial intelligence companies in America. Investors admired him because he rarely lost. Competitors respected him because he anticipated every move before it happened. Yet the same confidence that fueled his remarkable success had quietly convinced him that first impressions rarely deserved a second look. To Ethan, excellence usually arrived wearing expensive suits, prestigious titles, and recognizable names. The people serving coffee, polishing silverware, or quietly arranging chairs simply blended into the architecture of success. Across the ballroom, Naomi continued assisting the hospitality team as the opening remarks concluded. She replaced empty water bottles, aligned presentation materials near the side tables, and quietly responded whenever a guest requested anything. She remained almost invisible despite standing only a few feet from conversations capable of changing international business. One of the hotel managers thanked her for maintaining such remarkable composure during an unusually demanding evening. Naomi answered with a gentle smile and continued working without drawing attention to herself. Nearby, Ethan resumed speaking privately in Arabic with the visiting executives while reviewing the final presentation sequence. Believing nobody outside their circle understood the language, they became increasingly relaxed. One executive joked that luxury hotels always found staff who looked pleasant enough for photographs, but never important enough to remember afterward. Another laughed softly and remarked that some people spent entire careers carrying trays while others shaped the future from boardrooms. Ethan responded with an amused expression and quietly observed that ambition alone could never replace education or influence. Several executives nodded in agreement, completely comfortable inside what they believed was a conversation protected by language itself. Naomi passed beside them carrying a tray of freshly brewed coffee. Her footsteps never slowed. Her breathing remained calm. The polished silver coffee pot reflected the chandelier light as she carefully filled each cup with the same precise attention she had shown throughout the evening. She thanked every guest courteously before turning toward the service station once again. None of the executives noticed the thoughtful expression that briefly crossed her face. They assumed silence meant ignorance. They assumed professionalism meant passivity. They assumed a uniform revealed everything worth knowing about the person wearing it. The formal presentations continued as financial projections appeared across the large display screens. Charts climbed steadily upward. Forecasts promised extraordinary returns. Optimism filled the ballroom like quiet electricity. Yet beneath the polished speeches and confident predictions, another truth had already taken root. Every careless remark spoken that evening had added another piece to an invisible puzzle, and with every passing minute the moment when those assumptions would finally be tested drew closer than anyone at Ethan Caldwell's table could possibly imagine. The first presentation concluded beneath a wave of polite applause, and the ballroom shifted into the final phase of the evening. Contracts remained unopened on the center of the table, waiting for one last round of discussion before signatures would decide the future of two multinational companies. The atmosphere felt lighter now. Confidence had replaced caution. Expensive coffee filled the air with a rich aroma, while crystal glasses caught the golden glow of the chandeliers above. Ethan Caldwell leaned back comfortably, convinced every major obstacle had already been removed. The executives from Riyadh exchanged relaxed smiles, speaking more freely than they had earlier in the evening. The language flowing around the table remained Arabic, quick and effortless, carrying private observations hidden behind unfamiliar sounds to everyone else in the room. Or so they believed. Naomi returned with a fresh tray of coffee and sparkling water, moving between chairs with the same quiet professionalism that had made her nearly invisible all evening. She carefully placed a cup beside each guest without interrupting the conversation. Ethan barely acknowledged her presence before continuing another remark that drew several amused smiles from his colleagues. One executive quietly observed that some people became so comfortable serving others that they forgot they could ever become anything else. Another answered that education was a privilege not everyone earned. Ethan gave a small laugh and replied that intelligence usually announced itself long before someone ever put on an apron. The comments were delivered casually, almost lazily, as though discussing the weather instead of another human being standing only a few feet away. Naomi heard every sentence. She also heard something else, as the conversation drifted away from personal remarks and returned to business. One of the visiting executives summarized a financial clause that had just been revised moments earlier during a private meeting upstairs. Another executive repeated the numbers from memory, but one figure immediately caught Naomi's attention. It was subtle, almost invisible. A percentage had been quoted incorrectly, changing the meaning of an important profit distribution clause. The difference sounded insignificant during casual conversation, yet if carried into the final interpretation, it could redirect tens of millions of dollars over the lifetime of the agreement. Naomi slowed for only the briefest moment before continuing toward the service station. Her expression never changed. She said nothing. Behind her, the executives continued discussing the clause with growing confidence, completely unaware that the summary they were repeating no longer matched the official revision prepared only an hour earlier. Ethan nodded several times without checking the printed draft resting beside his leather portfolio. He trusted the conversation. He trusted the people around him. Most of all, he trusted his own certainty. Across the ballroom, the hotel's event coordinator quietly announced that the legal teams would gather at the central table in just a few minutes for the official document review before signatures. Guests adjusted their jackets, straightened notebooks, and returned to their assigned seats. The quiet excitement became almost tangible. Naomi stood near the service station, holding an empty silver tray, her eyes calmly following the movement around the room. She knew exactly what she had heard. She knew exactly why it mattered. And she also understood that within a few minutes, remaining silent would become far more difficult than speaking. The lead attorneys gathered around the polished conference table as assistants distributed the final printed agreements in identical black leather folders. Every conversation in the ballroom softened into a respectful hush. Even the musicians paused between songs, allowing only the quiet hum of the city beyond the glass walls to fill the room. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Pens rested beside signature pages. Cameras from the business press stood ready to capture the historic partnership. Ethan Caldwell smiled with complete confidence as he reached for the document. Across from him, the senior executive from Riyadh reviewed the opening pages one last time while continuing a brief discussion in Arabic with his advisors. They repeated the revised financial clause exactly as they had moments before. Again, the incorrect percentage appeared in their summary. Again, everyone around the table nodded in agreement. Naomi watched from several yards away, carrying a silver tray she no longer needed. She understood that if nobody spoke within the next few seconds, the misunderstanding would become part of the official discussion. She also understood exactly how unbelievable it would sound if a hotel waitress interrupted one of the most important business meetings of the year. Her manager quietly motioned for the service staff to remain against the wall until the signing ceremony concluded. Naomi took one slow breath. Then another. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory with perfect clarity. Respect every language, but respect the truth even more. Before doubt could change her mind, she walked calmly toward the conference table. The movement immediately caught several guests by surprise. One hotel supervisor started forward, assuming she had forgotten protocol, but Naomi politely raised one hand, asking for only a moment. Ethan looked up with visible impatience, clearly expecting a routine service question. Instead, Naomi spoke in calm, fluent Arabic. Her pronunciation was natural, her rhythm effortless, her tone respectful. She apologized for the interruption before carefully repeating the financial clause exactly as it appeared in the revised document prepared earlier that evening. Then she gently explained that the percentage discussed over the last several minutes reflected the previous draft rather than the corrected revision approved upstairs. The ballroom froze. Nobody reached for a coffee cup. Nobody whispered. Several executives stared at Naomi in complete disbelief. One attorney immediately lowered his eyes to the printed agreement and began reading the paragraph again. Another compared it against notes on his tablet. The senior executive from Riyadh slowly turned another page before looking back at Naomi with growing surprise. After several silent seconds, he answered her in Arabic with a detailed question about the revised distribution schedule. Naomi responded without hesitation, quoting the updated figures accurately and explaining how the adjustment affected both companies over the life of the agreement. The attorney finished checking the language, then quietly cleared his throat. He confirmed that Naomi's interpretation matched the official revision word for word. A ripple of astonishment spread through the ballroom. Ethan remained perfectly still. The confidence that had carried him through the evening suddenly gave way to uncertainty. For the first time since entering the Grand Crescent Hotel, he realized that every private joke, every careless assumption, and every dismissive remark spoken in Arabic had been fully understood by the woman he had never truly bothered to see. The room that had once celebrated his certainty now waited in complete silence for whatever he would say next. Silence settled over the ballroom with a weight no amount of wealth could lift. The crystal chandeliers still glowed above the guests. The city lights still shimmered beyond the towering windows. The cameras remained pointed toward the conference table. Yet everything that had seemed certain only moments before now felt completely different. No one reached for a pen. No one spoke. Even the servers paused where they stood, sensing that something far more important than a business agreement had just unfolded. Ethan Caldwell looked at Naomi Brooks as though he were seeing her for the very first time. Until that moment, she had been another member of the hotel staff, another face that blended into the evening without leaving an impression. Now she stood calmly beside the conference table with the same composed expression she had carried all night. She was neither proud nor defensive. She had not interrupted the meeting to embarrass anyone. She had spoken because the truth required a voice. The senior executive from Riyadh slowly closed the agreement folder before addressing Naomi again in Arabic. His tone carried genuine curiosity instead of authority. He asked where she had learned the language and how she had recognized the discrepancy so quickly. Naomi answered with quiet humility, explaining that languages had always been part of her life because her grandmother believed understanding another culture was one of the highest forms of respect. She added that she simply recognized the revised figures because they no longer matched the discussion taking place around the table. Her explanation was brief, thoughtful, and completely free of arrogance. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. One attorney smiled faintly before remarking that accuracy often arrived from the least expected places. Another executive nodded and admitted that without Naomi's observation, the misunderstanding might not have been discovered until much later in the negotiation process. Across the ballroom, whispers began spreading between guests who had witnessed only fragments of the conversation. They could not hear every Arabic sentence, but they understood enough from the expressions around the table to realize that something extraordinary had happened. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the contract resting before him. For the first time that evening, the numbers on the page no longer occupied his attention. Instead, another memory replayed inside his mind with uncomfortable clarity. Every careless joke, every dismissive smile, every assumption made simply because he believed another person could not understand him. None of those moments could be taken back. None of them had disappeared into the safety of an unfamiliar language. They had been heard. They had been understood. And despite every reason to remain silent, Naomi had still chosen to protect the integrity of the agreement instead of allowing the mistake to unfold. That realization settled more heavily than any financial loss ever could. The room waited for Ethan to respond, but confidence no longer came as easily as it had only minutes before. Success had taught him how to negotiate billion-dollar agreements. It had taught him how to read markets, manage risk, and persuade investors. Yet in that quiet ballroom, another lesson stood before him, one no business school had ever offered. Respect could not be purchased. Character could not be measured by a title. And intelligence never asked permission before revealing itself. Ethan slowly rose from his chair, his expression noticeably different from the confident smile he had worn throughout the evening. Every eye followed him as he turned toward the woman he had overlooked from the very beginning, understanding at last that the most valuable person in the room had never been the one sitting at the head of the table. No one expected Ethan Caldwell to move first. For several long seconds he remained standing beside his chair, his hands resting lightly on the leather folder that held the agreement everyone had come to celebrate. The confident executive who had commanded the room all evening seemed almost unrecognizable. He looked at Naomi Brooks, then slowly turned toward the delegation from Riyadh before speaking in clear English so every guest, every employee, and every member of the press could understand him without translation. He admitted that Naomi had prevented an important misunderstanding before it became an official mistake. He acknowledged that her knowledge had protected the integrity of the agreement and, more importantly, reminded everyone in the room that expertise could appear where people least expected it. The ballroom remained silent, not because anyone doubted his words, but because they sensed something even more unusual was about to happen. Ethan took one slow breath before facing Naomi again. This time his voice carried none of the effortless confidence that had filled the evening. It carried honesty instead. He apologized publicly for every assumption he had made about her. He admitted that he had mistaken a uniform for a measure of intelligence and had hidden disrespect behind a language he believed gave him privacy. He said there was no excuse for judging another human being before learning who they truly were. Around the ballroom, several guests lowered their eyes. A few executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, remembering the remarks they had contributed earlier in the evening. The senior executive from Riyadh stepped forward with a thoughtful smile and thanked Naomi in Arabic for preserving both the accuracy of the agreement and the trust between the two companies. Naomi answered in the same language with quiet grace, explaining that she had simply wanted everyone to begin their partnership with complete understanding. She never mentioned the jokes. She never repeated the insults. She never attempted to embarrass anyone. Her focus remained entirely on the truth and on the agreement itself. That choice impressed the room even more than her remarkable command of Arabic. Character, everyone realized, was revealed most clearly after victory, not before it. Ethan's legal advisor quietly confirmed that the corrected language had now been incorporated into every copy of the agreement. The revised documents were distributed once again, and this time each executive reviewed every page with greater care than before. When the signatures were finally placed on the paper, the applause that followed felt different from the celebration planned earlier in the evening. It no longer honored only a successful business partnership. It honored humility, honesty, and the unexpected reminder that wisdom did not belong exclusively to corner offices or executive titles. As photographers captured the historic moment, several investors approached Naomi personally to thank her for speaking when silence would have been easier. The hotel manager watched with unmistakable pride as guests who had overlooked her throughout the evening now greeted her with genuine respect. Ethan remained nearby, listening more than speaking. For perhaps the first time in years, he understood that leadership was not measured by how many people listened to your voice. It was measured by whether you were willing to listen when truth arrived from someone you had failed to notice. Naomi offered a warm smile, accepted the thanks with quiet humility, and returned the empty coffee service to her tray. Her uniform had not changed. Her job title had not changed. Yet as she walked across the polished marble floor beneath the golden chandeliers, nobody in the ballroom saw only a waitress anymore. They saw a woman whose dignity had quietly transformed the entire room. The ballroom slowly returned to its elegant rhythm, yet something invisible had changed forever. Conversations resumed. Glasses were raised in celebration. Photographers captured smiling executives standing beside freshly signed agreements that would appear on the front pages of business publications the next morning. To anyone arriving late, it would have looked like another successful corporate event. Only the people who had witnessed the evening from beginning to end understood that the most valuable lesson delivered inside the Grand Crescent Hotel had never been written into the contract. It had been spoken by someone who had not even been invited to the conference table. Naomi Brooks quietly carried the final coffee tray toward the service station while the remaining guests congratulated one another. She thanked co-workers who helped clear the ballroom, folded fresh linens, and completed the same closing responsibilities she performed after every shift. There was no dramatic celebration waiting for her behind the kitchen doors. No spotlight followed her across the polished marble floor. She did not ask for recognition because recognition had never been the reason she chose to speak. She simply believed that truth mattered more than comfort, and that respect should never depend upon a person's title, income, or clothing. Across the room, Ethan Caldwell remained in thoughtful conversation with several executives, yet his attention continued drifting toward the woman whose quiet courage had reshaped his understanding of leadership. Before leaving the ballroom, he walked toward the service area one final time. This time there were no cameras nearby and no audience waiting for another public statement. He simply thanked Naomi once again, this time as one professional thanking another. He admitted that the evening had revealed a weakness no financial report had ever measured. He had spent years learning how to evaluate companies, strategies, and opportunities, but somewhere along the way he had forgotten how easily assumptions could blind even successful people. Naomi smiled warmly and replied that everyone continued learning as long as they remained willing to listen. She wished him success with the new partnership and returned to stacking polished glasses for the next day's events. Ethan nodded quietly before walking away, carrying a lesson far more valuable than the agreement resting inside his briefcase. Long after the guests departed and the chandeliers gradually dimmed, the ballroom became silent once again. Hotel staff restored every chair to its place, gathered forgotten programs, and erased every visible sign that history had unfolded there only hours earlier. Outside, the Chicago skyline reflected across the calm river as Naomi stepped into the cool night air at the end of her shift. She carried the same small bag she had brought that morning. She wore the same black uniform she had worn throughout the evening. Nothing about her appearance announced what had happened inside those walls. Yet something had changed that could never be measured on a balance sheet. A room filled with wealth had discovered that dignity could not be purchased. A billionaire had learned that intelligence did not introduce itself through expensive titles. and a quiet waitress had reminded everyone that the strongest voice in any room is often the one that speaks only when truth truly matters. Because power may command attention for a moment, but character earns respect that lasts long after every meeting ends, every contract is signed, and every light in the ballroom fades into the night.